welcome to the MIDiA Research 2023 Predictions webinar. My name is Sion Tedessa and I'm the Communications Coordinator here at MIDiA Research. Before we get started, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and we are thrilled to have you here. So for those of you who are new to our webinars, let me take you through what to expect today. So our session is based on MIDiA's annual predictions report, which you can find on our website or in the description below. The webinar will last approximately an hour, and we will be joined by 9 of our in-house expert analysts. So first up, we will have Mark Mulligan, who will take us through the cost of living crunch, perceived value will be king, and the end of disruption. We've got Hannah Callard, who will take us through the scarcity revival. Tim Mulligan will take us through the decoupling of global distribution. Karol Severin will take us through social media and the games will eat entertainment. Ben Woods will take us through the year of creator activists. Tatiana Sirusano will take us through the algorithm becomes the focus group. Chris Takrar will take us through the rise of the moments. And last but not least, Ashley Miller and Annie Langston will take us through the authenticity crisis. At the end of the session, we will have time for Q&A. So whether you are on YouTube or LinkedIn, please use the chat function and submit your questions, and we will be able to answer them at the end. So thank you again for joining us, and I will now hand over to Mark Mulligan.
Thank you, Sion. Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us for our MIDiA's first webinar of the year. For those of us, for those of you even, who have followed MIDiA for any time, you'll know one of our sort of key points of the year is writing our predictions for the coming year. Perhaps there hasn't been a year as important as 2023 for trying to predict what is going to come. Because 2022 was a year like no other in modern times. And so many of the things that shaped 2022 are not only just going to still be there in 23, but they're going to accentuate. And if you stop to think about it for a moment, there is so much that is happening in the world that in previous years we might have had one of these things to deal with at any one time. Now we've got a cost of living crisis, energy crisis, climate crisis, war crises. We've got so many different things going on that are all interconnected and interdependent and all have a direct impact on the digital entertainment business and the creator economy. So what we're going to do in this webinar is, as Sion mentioned, we're going to be walking through some of the highlights of the 2023 predictions report. These are the each of the sections. Now, what I would say is, what we try to do with the predictions, it's less about saying, oh, Netflix is going to hit X million subscribers, and it's more about identifying the themes and the trends. So that's really what we're doing, sort of painting the big, broad brushstrokes, themes that we think are going to shape the year ahead and beyond. And we're going to try to make a really strong effort, as we did in the report, to not make it all doom and gloom. In fact, what we're really focusing on, a lot of what we think is some of the sort of market changing dynamics, where actually, why ever let a disaster or a catastrophe go to waste? There's always an opportunity to go and build and try new things. And we think that this next year absolutely presents a huge amount of opportunity for new things to come to market and new ways of doing things. So first off, these are the 3 meta trends which I'm going to focus on before letting each of the analyst team walk through some of theirs in some detail. So the first one, there is no getting away from the cost of living crisis. If you think about it, rising energy costs, rising food costs, coupled with wages not keeping track with rising costs, strikes happening all across Europe with public sector workers trying to get inflation-linked pay rises, etc. Clearly, there is something really significant going on, something which is probably going to end up being a paradigm shift. There will be a period of time, of which 2023 will be part, where consumers will have less money in their pocket in real terms because their salaries have not yet caught up with inflation. And because entertainment is a discretionary spend, it is really at risk. However, what we've seen when we talk to consumers, and we've been surveying them for a couple of years now about what they will do when or if they find themselves having less money to spend, they say they will go out less, they'll eat out less, they'll go to concerts less, but they'll spend more time at home. More time at home means more demand for home entertainment. And digital subscriptions are a relatively affordable luxury. And they provide escapism from what is an increasingly bleak world outside the windows and doors. So in this context, home entertainment may well be reasonably well placed, not brilliantly well placed, but certainly a lot better placed than other parts of the economy. And related to this, a crucial thing is when consumers are there trying to work out how they're going to cut the costs, nobody wants to give anything up. So there'll be a really strong focus on value for money, making sure that the things that they retain are the things that represent the best value for the money that they're spending. So that means as a content provider, whether you're the creator, whether you're a media company, whether you're a platform, doing simply the same as what you did last year is not going to be enough. You have to exceed your audience's expectations. And providing sheer value for money, let alone quality of value for money, when we look at things like Amazon Prime, Apple One, which bundle together a whole bunch of different digital subscriptions into one affordable price point, those are going to be particularly well placed. The last bit I want to talk about is more about a sort of a second order consequence of this particular period, and one which is going to take a couple of years to move on to the next chapter. We call it the end of disruption. What we mean by this is all of the really big tech companies that came up that shaped today's digital world. They've been around for a decade, 2 decades, many of them. They are now incumbents. They were insurgents that reshaped the world. Now they're incumbents set on protecting their space. So we're ready for the next wave of new, the next Google, the next Amazon, the next Apple. They aren't coming yet, with the possible exception of ByteDance, for many reasons. One of the reasons is because the big tech companies have been able to spend so much to keep ahead of disruption. But as we've seen many of them scaling back on their R&D spend, that means we're essentially going to have this hiatus period for a couple of years where the big tech companies aren't really doing much new, and the newer, younger companies aren't able to find the investment because of rising interest rates and investor caution given the wider economic climate. This means come maybe 2024, 2025, when we've moved into the next stage of the economic cycle, there's going to be 2 years or more of pent-up innovation demand that is going to create possibly one of the most exciting periods in the entire history of the digital entertainment and digital technology world, certainly since the advent of the internet. Could Web3 be part of that? Absolutely. What it will be, we will see. But for now, the next 2 years is probably going to be the lull before the storm. So there are 3 of the big themes, sort of framing what the rest of the analysts are going to be about. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Hannah, who's going to talk about the Scarcity revival.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. If we just go onto the chart for this. When we talk about Scarcity revival, what we're sort of more talking about is the revival of a need for establishing scarcity. If we think about like the basic premise in economics of value is driven by scarcity or perception thereof, digital entertainment is not necessarily having the upper hand at the moment just because there's so much of it. Pre-pandemic, we already had, so those of you who follow media will probably remember this term, is the saturated attention economy. There was just about as many hours of the day that consumers could dedicate to entertainment. They already were. As COVID happened, we saw an explosion of new services. Obviously, TikTok took off, but we saw a whole bunch of new video streaming platforms, for example, more game streaming subscriptions and the like. And these were all able to thrive because there was no competition from everyday activities. And so there was sort of a boom period because there were more hours in a day available, basically. And now we're in that post-COVID revival. We're in the crunch, sorry. Where not only are all of these platforms competing with each other for amount of time consumers spend on each one of them, but we're also seeing competition with IRL. But on those platforms, we're seeing ever more content being produced. So not only is it professional stuff, not only is it very formal, highly polished productions on the likes of Netflix, but you also have fan tributes on the likes of TikTok. You have advertising that's sitting side by side with UGC content and official content. And now we have our AI, OpenAI's ChatGPT, which is obviously going to be very useful for independent creators. For example, they can use it to do marketing posts. People can come up with new pictures. There's just more content that's being made more easily. And this is flooding the entertainment environment as well. So one of the things entertainment's really going to have to do moving forward, particularly as consumers are having to make budget decisions based on, the cost of living crisis, is entertainment needs to establish what is scarce about it and what therefore is most valuable. So we're going to see, despite the fact that people were more likely to stay inside, as Mark mentioned, those live experiences are going to have more value to them because they're going to be more scarce, for example. So the cinema is going to be seeing a bit of a resurgence because it's sort of an affordable luxury, and that sort of thing. So that's an underpinning dynamic that is going to be very important to take into consideration as we move into 2023. And with that, I think I will hand you over to my colleague, Tim, who will talk about one of our other exciting themes for the year.
Thank you, Hannah. So I'm going to set the scene for a unfolding area of disruption and potential innovation going forwards, largely from a cultural perspective, which is around the evolution of distribution in a world that's becoming increasingly multipolar and increasingly nuanced in not just how content is distributed, but also how it's actually consumed as well. So there's two aspects to this, and they both touch upon the introductory remarks by Mark Mulligan. And the first and most significant area here is the increasing polarization of the world into different isolated markets. So up until the 2020s, the digital era was divided between China and the rest of the world. China famously had its Great Wall of China, Great Firewall of China, as well as the Great Wall of China, where 50,000 government employees made sure that a lot of non-approved content and services did not get access to the Chinese market. Now, this allowed the evolution and dramatic growth, the hot housing exponential growth of services such as Tencent, WeChat, and QQ, the rise of Youku Tudou, Iqiyi, etc., all of which gained traction because they had the ability to grow without any external competition. Now, in the rest of the world, the markets have overwhelmingly been dominated by US originating startups in the digital media distribution area, which have been funded by investors predominantly based in the West Coast of the US. Now, this is changing, and it's changing for a number of reasons which are predominantly politically driven, but have significant implications, not just from a growth perspective for streaming services in particular and social video, but also from the potential cultural ramifications for how this actually changes the nature of entertainment itself towards the second half of this decade of the 2020s. Now, first and foremost, we had in summer 2020, India, the most heavily focused and targeted and attractive global growth market for non-Indian companies in the tech space. They announced after a border skirmish with China that they were banning 59 social apps such as TikTok, WeChat, etc., which allowed the opportunity for indigenous clones to be able to create their alternative versions without the competition of the more established precursors. Following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, the same process has been replicated in the Russian market, a smaller but still significant market for the tech majors. And we've seen a number of clones stepping in to fill the void from the major international services that are pulled out, with some significant cost to those services. So when Netflix pulled out in April last year, they lost 700,000 subscribers. There was a $40 billion temporary write-down on the valuation of Netflix in the US market, and their globalized market cap. Obviously, significantly impacted by other areas that were stress testing the Netflix overall outlook. But this didn't help. These 700,000 lost subscribers was an additional challenge that accelerated the decline. Now, on the other side, of distribution becoming increasingly fragmented. We have the rise of content that is less Western-centric and more localized. And this has been driven by the predominantly the streaming service fixation on growing local content to get local subscribers in, to effectively offer streaming TV as an alternative to local incumbents. So Squid Game, prime example of this, commissioned for a local market to grow Netflix within the South Korean market, has since been able to expand to become an international hit because of taking advantage of the long tail implications of Netflix's global reach. Now, what this means, as Asia Pacific becomes the most important area for growth of video over this decade for subscriptions, is we'll see more of this happening, which means there's going to be a greater impact on non-Western centric content becoming pushed by the streaming services as they look to gain market share in those markets. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Karol.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And quick hi back to everyone who's already sent us some comments. Quick reminder to those of you who may have just joined, whatever platform you may be on, just put your comments or questions in the comment section, and we'll do our best to address as many of those as we can. And with that, let's move on to games quickly. Over the last 20 years or so, games and social media have grown from sort of the cultural fringes into full-blown mainstream. Both are now used by more than half of the consumer population on a regular basis. And that carries both good and bad news. Games have obviously grown tremendously over time, and they are arguably stronger than they have ever been. But as you saturate any market, the question always becomes, where and how do you grow from here? And of course, this question is even more pertinent now, as we find ourselves in a saturated attention economy, coupled with the negative pressures on consumers' disposable income, as a couple of my colleagues already touched upon. We believe the next chapter of growth for games is growing from a mainstream cultural proposition to becoming a cultural epicenter. And by this, we mean that games, alongside social media, have the opportunity to become infrastructural, distribution, and creative partners to other forms of entertainment, for example, video and music. And this includes things like creator tools, from the high-end production technologies such as Unreal Engine 5 being utilized in movie productions, through to enabling music creators to make beats in Roblox, let's say. On the distribution side, games have the opportunity to help music and video create experiences which would not be possible in a non-interactive environment, and thus help them create incremental value for consumers. We know that consumers' time is pretty much tapped out. Almost all of it is allocated. And no matter how good your game is, gamers are never going to be just gamers. They will be video consumers, they will be music listeners, they will be sports consumers, social media users, etc. And we know that time spent is increasingly difficult to come by. And so games kind of have two options from here. One, they can keep on kind of struggling to compete for time spent against formats which are actually inherently better placed for growth in a saturated attention economy. Those are typically the sort of less attention demanding formats. Think, audiobooks, podcasts, social media, etc. And games have a little bit of a disadvantage here. Or option B, games companies and games as such can actually start incorporating the time and money consumers spend on things like video and music already into their games worlds and ecosystems, in return for a cut, of course. Be it incorporating, things like social media feeds into low engagement in-game spots, be it in like spectator modes, building bridges between IRL and digital entertainment, such as, for example, Riot Games have been doing with their virtual artists, or otherwise enhancing previously isolated entertainment experiences. And to be clear, this is not about games coming in to steal away time spent from video or music. Quite the opposite. This is about offering these traditionally less interactive or non-interactive formats improvements on user experiences, again, to create incremental value. In other words, games have the opportunity to become truly indispensable partners and growth partners for the likes of music and video, just like or similarly to how social media have done in the past. And so this is what we mean by games shifting from becoming an important part of consumer culture to becoming one of its epicenters. But games are not pursuing this opportunity alone. And obviously in the opposite corner, we have social media, which is another interactive entertainment format that is pursuing kind of a similar cultural epicenter status. Both games and social media have their unique strengths and weaknesses. Social media have the upper hand in terms of the variety of content and content formats they already incorporate. Games, on the other hand, have an advantage in having mastered the 3D interface. So this isn't going to be a one winner takes all situation, but it does mean that in 2023 and perhaps for the next half a decade, the key competitive battle in entertainment and in entertainment consumption will take place between games and social media. Capturing synergic partnerships with music, video, sports should therefore really be the prize to keep your eyes on as a games company. Games companies that do embrace this, in my opinion, have a good growth opportunity, have good growth opportunities in front of them, even in the recessionary period. And that's because this strategy is an effective way to increase value to consumers. And as Mark said already, value will be the holy grail of 2023 when it comes to growth. And keep in mind that value doesn't just have to mean quality versus price. In the saturated attention economy and the era of content overload, incremental value can also be generated through saving consumers time and, say, brain capacity, for example, by diminishing user experience friction. Finally, everyone, we do have a number of additional more tactical games-related predictions in our 2023 predictions report. If you're a MIDiA client, this is available to you for free. If you're not one yet, do reach out to us to explore how to become one. As ever, thank you everyone for listening, and I look forward to speaking with as many of you as possible in the year ahead. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ben.
Thank you, Karol. And first of all, thanks everyone for the comments so far, and great to see so many faces from across the world. It's brilliant. As Mark said and others, entertainment is being impacted by this unfurling recession, and social video is not going to be immune to this. I'm going to be looking specifically at what sort of impact this will have on the relationship between social video platforms and creators, who are the ones which have essentially driven their soaring popularity to date. So how did we sort of get to this point? Well, currently, the relationship between creators and social video platforms has been pretty peaceful. There has been some flare-ups. So the backlash against Twitch is an example of where creators took to social media to express their anger over changes to the revenue share for those top creators. But other than that, mostly has remained calm. And the reason for this is because the driving force is really digital advertising revenue. And digital advertising revenue has remained really buoyant. Even during the pandemic, when other sources of advertising came off the boil, digital ads were robust. However, there are indications now that digital advertising revenues could start to decline. And with that, it's going to force social video platforms to think carefully about how they maintain their revenue share. Now, we've seen some reactions already. Social video platforms have explored ways in which they can diversify their revenue or launch new services. I'm thinking about the likes of TikTok or YouTube pushing into e-commerce through live shopping, or Patreon, the creator subscription services tool, launching its own native video, its own native video product. Tumblr moving into live streaming. But this isn't going to be enough when social video platforms are going to have to think really carefully about their costs. And because of that, the creator payment terms that they have are going to come into focus. Now, this is not great news for creators who are already experiencing a real pinch. We know that the pandemic engagement boom that led to a big spike in subscriptions to creator channels is starting to wane. We also know that if there's going to be a digital advertising slowdown, that creators will just be caught up in that as well in the round in terms of the impact on the amount of money that they make from advertising. So how is this going to bear out? So we know from the Twitch example that creators are not afraid to go to social media to express their concern if they feel like they're not getting a fair deal from the platforms. Now, in this instance, we may find that the creator payment terms are changed not just for the top creators, but also more broadly hitting the mid-tier and the lower tier as well. And if that's the case, what we could find is that some of the top creators will go on social media to express their concern, and at the same time will begin to mobilize the lower tiers of creators, creating a bit of a groundswell of protest and dissent, which will put some of the platforms under pressure. Now, what will be the fallout of this is those platforms which are able to hold their nerve when it comes to creator payment terms and keep them to say the same or offer something more beneficial may have the opportunity here to sweep up more top creator stars from their rivals or swathes of that mid-tier during this very difficult time. And so in summary, what that will do is enable them to be on the front foot when we start to climb out of this recession and see brighter times ahead. So just in sum up, those platforms, social video platforms that are able to ride out this storm and protect their creator payment terms are the ones that are likely to be on the front foot as we move out of this unfolding recession that we're seeing at the moment. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Tati, who will discuss how the algorithm will become the focus group. Tati.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm here to talk about almighty algorithms, which I think, as we've all experienced, now kind of shape every aspect of our daily lives. And of course, that includes entertainment. So this has already had a huge impact on how entertainment companies operate and sort of where power is concentrated. So just to give a quick recap of the shift up until now, pre-algorithm, entertainment companies, whether that was, record labels, film studios, etc., used to take much of a top-down approach of essentially mandating the limited selection of content that consumers could choose from. But now, so much of that gatekeeping power has been transferred to algorithms, which do the work of surfacing content directly tailored to, what the technology thinks you will enjoy. So we've basically gone from a very top-down approach to a very bottom-up one. And because of that, many people would argue that this is sort of a more democratic system for how content can rise to the top, because essentially anything has a chance of making it onto your feed, and consumers are basically voting for content with their every action, whether it's a like, a share, or even just their time. I think the biggest example we've all seen of this is in music, where so many artists who maybe never would have been able to get past their local bar circuit in the 90s or 2000s now can attract attention and even from the gatekeepers from those entertainment companies themselves overnight. The other thing that algorithms are rapidly changing is they're accelerating the fragmentation of culture, which is something that we talked about actually if you were with us in last year's predictions webinar, where instead of there being one hit song or one hit movie or artist for everyone, there are increasingly many more smaller hits for individuals and their niches. So they're sort of less of a mainstream. Algorithms are only further driving this because they're pushing people further into their niches, and algorithms are also connecting people from the same niches. So where does this leave entertainment companies today? Well, over time, all entertainment industries, but particularly music, are becoming a lot more reactive, where they're putting resources behind the content that consumers are already sort of raising their hands for by moving it through the algorithm, rather than sort of force feeding them content. And this is a dynamic that will continue to play out this year. So something we've already started to see, and I think we think will just further continue, is more and more savvy entertainment companies are starting to use the algorithm as a focus group, as a way to test content in real time, often before committing resources to it. So if you think about the way the algorithm works, first, content is surfaced to a really small group of users that are deemed the most likely to react well to it. If those consumers do react well by, again, liking or sharing or spending time, the content goes to a wider, similar, but less niche group of users. And it just continues to spiral from there. So if you think about it, many companies can now start to test content by just putting it into the algorithm and seeing how people react, which can be especially helpful, in a recessionary environment when funds are tight, and especially for independent creators who maybe could not have, hired a focus group, which is why we've seen this happen a lot with music, where already so many artists are, instead of spending hundreds of dollars mixing and mastering and releasing every song that they have, they're putting a few out on TikTok or wherever, seeing how people respond, and then putting their money behind the ones that people respond best to. And even superstars like, SZA and Charlie Puth have been seen doing this. That process in itself is even becoming a product, and that's something that my colleague Chris will talk about next. But before I hand you over to him, just a bit about the second order impacts of all this, because there's always second impacts. And I think you may have noticed a new phrase enter our language this year, that is algorithmic anxiety, or sort of this uneasiness that comes with feeling like your whole life is governed by an algorithm and thinking, do I even like this thing, or is the algorithm just deciding that I do? So because of that and a couple of other factors, we think that despite the dominance of algorithms, human creation will be a bit elevated in 2023 because of that algorithmic anxiety, because of, as a result, people craving authenticity, which is something that Ashley and Annie will talk about later on, and also Gen Z's appetite for more control over their content experiences, which is something you've probably heard us talk about before and that we've seen in our consumer surveys. So even though the majority of consumers will always be passive, will always be relying on that algorithm, we think more and more consumers will be looking to friends and tastemakers for recommendations. So people that they either know or feel like they know and trust, rather than editorial curators like playlist curators who are faceless and nameless, and influencers who are paid to promote. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions about that, we would love to hear them, or anything else that you've seen. So please drop them in the comments. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thank you so much, Tati. And hello, everyone. Happy New Year. And thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely to see you all across the world chiming in. And yeah, thank you very much for being here. So I'm here to talk about the rise of the moment. And a big foundation behind this is there is just so much music being released right now. So 100,000 artists every month putting out music. And it's just so hard to stand out for any artist to really break through with just their music alone. And so what we've heard a lot from artists and their teams is this idea of having to create moments and finding a way to really stand out through the experience of music rather than just the music itself. And so when we turn music into moments and we create these experiences with this view of having a more fulfilling engagement with music than just leaning back and consuming it, what we end up seeing is artists can accelerate, because it's not just, you're not just reaching one consumer, you're actually reaching many, because people are recreating with music, they're sharing their music, and they're making the music the soundtrack to their lives, which everyone else is being able to experience through that. And one great example of this is Armani White, who was in the studio just making music, and he had this hook about Billie Eilish and being stylish. Some of you might have heard it. Some of you might not have, but what's important is that moment of him in the studio was captured and it was shared. And then Billie Eilish saw it and reshared it and was using that as a soundtrack for her as well. And so suddenly you've got moments creating more moments, and you've got this whole process of building context, building a narrative, and just creating a foundation for this artist to basically be relevant. And so this is the value in really opening up the process of making music before you get to this finished product, because you're building the brand of the artist, you're building demand for the music, and you're creating a journey for your fans as well. And on the next slide, we'll be able to dive a bit deeper into this, because moments aren't ubiquitous, no matter how big they are. As we've already heard a lot about this fragmentation of culture, no matter how big a moment gets, most people aren't really going to hear it. And so what is really important now is the scene that this moment is happening in, the community and the culture around it. And music needs this cultural context, but the culture also needs music, because people are searching for a soundtrack to their lives. They're searching for aesthetics, and they're looking towards the key icons and the key cultural gatekeepers in these communities, in these scenes, to help them work out how to soundtrack their lives. And a great example of this is Sleepy Hallow, who comes from the drill scene and isn't really that active on social media, but his music has been huge on social media because it's come from this community that's built in the real world and built from the bottom up, and it's penetrated online, and it's really just exploded. And he had an amazing year last year because the music was being targeted by people's identity and the culture that they're part of. And that's what builds fandom. That's what creates scenes. And it meets the real emerging needs for so many consumers of something real and something authentic. And that's what my colleagues Ash and Ali are going to be talking about next. So over to you.
Hi, thank you, Chris. That is a perfect segue into what we're about to talk about, which is the authenticity crisis. So consumers are craving authenticity, or at least what they perceive to be authentic. This isn't just in the creator content that they consume, but this is also in the friend-to-friend platforms that they're a part of. This can be seen in the rising success of Be Real over the last year, which is a very clear indicator. But it's also seen in things like the popularity of Instagram photo dumps or the close friend stories feature. But looking at creator content, we can see that creators are encouraged and they are ultimately rewarded by their audiences for maintaining that authentic, transparent, relatable sort of standard, even at the height of their success. So an example of that would be Brittany Broski and Teffy, who found massive success on the TikTok platform, but then they went to find even more success off platform, not just having support from the audience that they had already garnered, but also gaining new support from new audiences. And that is largely because they maintained that authentic brand throughout their careers. However, on the flip side, if you're looking at Addison Rae, who went on to appear in a Netflix film, at that time, she lost millions and millions of followers on the platform that she found the most success on in the first place, which was TikTok. And this is because her relatability and her authenticity was fractured as a result of her superstardom. Now, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. So if we're looking at superstars that were already established before this, we can see that even they are trying to make more of an effort to be authentic and to be relatable. So an example of this is Dolly Parton joining TikTok, and she's showing her authentic self through posting like interviews of her, old interviews of herself. But we can also see it in more recent stars like Meghan Trainor, who is posting more content of her family, of her participating in trends, of her friends. This overflows into social media marketing practices as well. So since the lockdown boom, we are moving away from this legacy model, which is where a product is marketed and promoted to a mass audience in the hope that some of them will resonate and ultimately buy whatever it is that is being sold. But now, because of the sophisticated algorithm that Tatiana spoke about before, we are moving more into a scenes model where more targeted product campaigns are being developed and promoted to niche scenes that are most likely to resonate with that brand of product in the first place. Then, as a result, partnerships are then established between the brand and the key figures within those niche scenes. The content is created, it's promoted, then it is the authenticity is questioned. Once this authenticity test has been passed by the consumers, it then goes into either them purchasing whatever is being sold or participating in some way through lean through or lean in behavior. When content seems authentic, consumers are more inclined to participate in recreation and the trends around that. So an example of this is Sam Smith and Kim Petras promoting their campaign for Unholy, or Ray and her song Escapism. Now, that was paid for. However, the authenticity seemed to be like, well, it seemed to be there already. It seemed to be like there. So then people resonated with that more. They wanted to participate in the trends. They wanted to kind of participate in the marketing. And then it obviously worked because all of these songs ended up charting at #1 at some point. So authenticity is key.
And more into the audio world, podcasts are a way for creators to be authentic, and they are also a vessel for information for both mainstream audiences and niche scenes. While this gives more representation for a variety of audiences, the flip side is this creates more opportunities for creators to spread misinformation and harmful content. Now, the Joe Rogan controversy was the first mainstream discussion around the safety of podcasts, and as a result of this, Spotify debuted its Safety Advisory Council to address harmful audio content. Social media and streaming platforms are now content producers and will be under pressure to balance the freedom of creators and their authentic selves with consumer safety, which will potentially impose new rules for creators. And with that, I will hand it back to Mark.
Great, thank you, Annie, and thank you, everyone, and all the analysts. So I think hopefully you've seen there a bunch of really quite different themes and ideas, which, as I said at the start, is hopefully giving you some cause for optimism in what is a relatively unsettling look of a year ahead. There's been a bunch of questions come in, so I'm going to sort of run through some of those now, pass them, and sort of aim some at the audience, so the analysts. So the first one that comes up is from David Boxenbaum, which is, now that live business is back in full swing, what is the outlook for live streaming? So I'm going to pass that one on to Tatiana. So Tatiana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so thanks, David, for the question. I think it's so interesting how for the past 2 years even, we've wondered what is going to happen to live streaming when the touring industry comes back, and now we're finally here and can sort of start to answer that question. I think we've all seen that there's sort of two stories coming out from the return of touring, of physical touring, which is that, if you're a big or medium-sized artist, you're doing great. Maybe you're even having the best tour ever, the best year ever. But if you're a medium-sized artist or a smaller artist, it can be difficult and maybe even impossible to tour. So I think we've always at MIDiA seen live streaming as a potential alternative to that sort of grueling touring circuit, especially for smaller acts and the new generation of digital natives who might not even really see physical touring as their natural route. But also for the larger artists who may want to avoid those same things. So I think we still see live streaming as filling those spaces. And for what it's worth, in our consumer surveys, the percentage of consumers who go to live streams monthly has stayed relatively steady. So even though it's still niche, it's not disappearing now that live in person is back. And the final thing I'll say is, if people are trying to find more cost-effective ways to be entertained, live streaming might be a good way for them to do that. It's a lot less expensive than going out to see a show in person. So I think that's probably how I would answer.
Yeah, great thoughts, Tati. And I think just to add one bit onto it is, when the pandemic happened and there was this huge sort of gold rush around the live streaming market, I think there was a perception in some parts that it was going to be a permanent replacement for a chunk of the live market. I think the best way to think about live streaming is it's a complement. And it's a complement for all of the reasons that Tati's spoken about, but also as a creative complement as well. A live stream does not simply need to be a replication of a live concert online. It can be so many other things as well. And if you look at the way that live streaming technology is used outside of music, whether it's in game streaming or whatever else it might be, then you can see, the creative capabilities and potential around live streaming music, I think, have only just been, the surface has only just been scratched. So moving on to the next question. This one is from Caroline Giebrich, and this is games versus social media makes sense, but where does a company like TikTok sit? That they think of themselves more of an entertainment provider, or is it more like a social network? So I think, Ash, that sounds like a good question for you to have a go at.
Yes, I'm very excited by this question. So I think the point of TikTok is that it is a social entertainment platform. It is unlike the likes of BeReal and Instagram, where friends are connecting with each other. I know that you can send TikToks to friends on TikTok, but it's not really a friend networking platform. So I think that's where that takes place. It stands in very good stead to stand out and remain popular because of that. I know that there have been questions before with competition. For example, BeReal obviously came out, and then TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat sort of created their own versions of the BeReal. And it was sort of like, oh, is that it? Is BeReal going to end because they've got these much bigger, larger platforms competing with them in the same sort of room, the same sort of space? But the answer is no. They've all got their very unique selling points, and TikTok's unique selling point is that it is an entertainment platform where everyone can come and there's something for everyone. It's divided into niches. It's very much a very entertainment first platform rather than a social networking platform like the others have.
Great. And Karol, do you want to just sort of add any particular thoughts from the games perspective?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I mean, whenever you kind of think about it, it's an excellent question as to where TikTok sits in this space. Actually, as an anecdote from last year's Gamescom, one of the largest stages of the whole Gamescom was actually the TikTok stage. And not only that, it was actually the stage where most of the younger players and teenage gamers were congregating. Probably that and sort of the Nintendo stand with Super Mario stuff. So it did kind of give you the glimpse into what the future of kind of games culture may look like. And in a sense, I would always go back to when we try to sort of categorize these things, always think about what the end game of the company is. For TikTok, it's ultimately advertising sales and data sales, etc. And so there is certainly, in my opinion, more of a space to compete on the social media side of things. But for games companies, TikTok doesn't need to be a competitor there. Games companies can exactly use that to their advantage. If you know your gamers are pausing the game session to go on TikTok, bring some parts of TikTok inside the game. Embrace the fact that they have certain behaviors that have been adopted rather than fighting against them because of the sake of a category or a sector that you may fall into.
Perfect. And Karol, while I've got you, there's a question here from Richard Kramer. So game shifting sounds promising, but a lot of pain right now. How do you see the fortunes of the AAA console games facing rising costs versus a clearly troubled mobile casual games market?
Thanks, Richard. Tricky one. If we go back to the thread that goes throughout this whole webinar and probably throughout the 2023, value will be king. You're right, costs are rising. Now, who is the best positioned in this dynamic, especially when it comes to AAAs? It's, again, the companies whose end game or the pure end game isn't just about selling games profitably. Think companies like Microsoft, for example, has much less pressure, to make a game immediately profitable than a standalone AAA studio. And that's probably not, of course, at the same time, financing and debt is becoming much more expensive. That probably means there is going to be more mergers and acquisitions. There's going to be more opportunities for companies whose end game isn't solely in making games profitable to be able to enter into deals with companies that are actually fully dependent on making profit out of games. Mark?
Perfect. Great. Okay. It's an interesting question, and I'm going to pass this one to Hannah as she's just recently written about this. So there's a question here from Ruben Nathaniel. Curious how the team thinks the rise of creative AI technologies will affect the music and wider entertainment industry. So Hannah, as you've just recently written on this, do you want to share some of your thoughts?
Sure. The blog is now live if anyone wants to check it out on our website. Yeah, it's a bit of an existential question for the industry, not just music, but all of entertainment, really. How will it impact the future of content creation? It'll make it easier, which means there'll be more of it, but we're already in a bit of a attention saturation moment as it is. It does make it more accessible. So, for example, you have a lot of artists who, I know Tati's written about this, these independent artists who are now spending, what is it, like the tweet is like 90% stress, 10% making music. If these creators have to spend all their time and efforts on marketing themselves, they don't have time to make music, and now they can have more time to make music because they're just using the AI to do all the stuff that they don't want to do. And so obviously this makes the industry a little bit more accessible for more people. However, the flip side of that is it's almost there's no consensus. There's not going to be a consensus on what jobs are we going to delegate to the AIs and what jobs are going to stay human. And ultimately, from a company perspective, it's just cheaper to use an AI. So while obviously, yeah, you still want to have like the big artist on the billboard, what does that mean for songwriters? What does that mean for people who are working on more of the tech background? Because it's cheaper if you get the AI to do it than if you pay a lot of royalties for a larger team behind the scenes. So a blessing and a curse, I think, is definitely the way to look at it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hannah. And I think one of the things we've seen already with some of the the AI tools out there is, the databases that they take in order to be able to go make all of the calculations. There's typically a huge amount of web scraping, and that often means taking other people's content, whether it's images, whether it's art, sort of text, etc., etc. So there is, there's certainly a huge amount of copyright issues which are going to need to be, sorted out some stage or another. But I think, and this is one of the things I found particularly interesting in your blog post, Hannah, it's like delineating between things that can assist with some of the, the more mechanical parts of creation versus the actual, the really artistic bit. I think that's probably what the next couple of years will be shaped by, is finding where that balance is, where AI is a tool that helps sort of, do some of the more tedious parts, or starts the creative inspiration, the spark, and then, there's still actually the art itself fundamentally comes from feeling. And so far, AI can't feel. So we've still got some way to go yet.
Not yet. Definitely the lines are a lot blurrier than they seem like they should be. I don't know if anyone watching has used the DALL-E bot or anything, but it's pretty, some of the stuff comes out a bit weird, but some of it's pretty convincing. And what's really a shame about it is it's not, when we think about like the old-fashioned sci-fi, they thought robots would take all the mundane tasks like doing the dishes, and now we have robots that are doing the creative aspect of humanity, which is, writing things and making pictures. And it kind of begs the question, what are we going to use it for? Because what's the point of art if not communicating feeling? And if these things are just more content for the content mill, that doesn't really help anyone. But we will see. It'll be an interesting year to watch this stuff unfold.
Great. Thanks, Anna. So I've got a question now for Ben, and this is from Gina Kloppel, which is, any thoughts on social video taking the place of traditional TV?
Yeah, thanks, Gina. I think that's a really good question, and one that speaks to research that we're doing, have done at MIDiA and doing currently. It speaks to attention inflation, which is a trend we've established post-pandemic, or identified, I should say, whereby we found that during the sort of big entertainment boom, engagement boom during the pandemic, as we came the other side of it, people didn't stop consuming the same amount of entertainment, even though they were going back to work or what have you. But they were just doing a lot more of it, but they just weren't as engaged as they had been before. And really, that's because of multitasking. So a lot of people are sitting there, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat are going to be guilty of this as well. Watching a show on Netflix while scrolling social media on their phone, or seeing an interesting YouTube video and losing track as to what's happening on the TV. So social is eating into TV, and it is something which SVOD and TV is going to have to address, because primarily the younger demographics are not just leaning back as older demographics are used to when it comes to their consumption of television. More and more they're leaning through by chatting and commenting or posting, or actually creating content together, creating content themselves. So really, the way I see it is, going forward, TV and SVOD needs to think about a way in which they can embrace these sort of social interactive behaviors to cater to younger generations and those of the older generations who have adopted social media, to make it part of the entertainment experience. We've got watch parties which are starting to come on stream, but really need a lot more emphasis put on the fandom element and how they can really speak to fans. But essentially, I think if S4 doesn't do this, social media will really eat into the level of engagement that audiences have with them. And I've focused two of my reports, my most recent report published in January and one coming out soon on watch parties will speak to this. So if you're interested, feel free to check those out.
Thank you, Ben. So I think we've got time for one more question. So apologies for those that we're not going to be able to get through. So there's a couple which are sort of NFT and Web3 related. So there's one from Tom Grayson, nothing on music NFTs. Does media think the bubble has already burst? And then there's one from Dick Huey on the back of Tom's question. Any thoughts about Web3 community, providing the interface for the trusted community structure that will power 2023 music interactions? So I'm going to bring in Chris, Tati and Karol to have a look at this. What I'll just say as a sort of a opening comment is one of our predictions from our 2022 predictions report was that NFTs were going to have a bit of a sort of a dampening of the enthusiasm and the momentum by about the middle of the year, and that did manifest. And that's just a natural part of the cycle. You always have with new technologies an initial surge where basically the technology gets ahead of consumer demand. And then it takes time, this sort of, after you've had that peak of inflated expectations, you go to this trough period where there's a rebuilding, a recalibration, and then if the technology is going to be ready for mainstream, then it will get there at a slower, steady period over the coming years. So that's where we are, I think, with NFTs more broadly, but in music as well, it's amplified. And it's amplified really because it is a subset of the population who understand NFTs. It's a subset of those who will pay for them. And it's a subset of music fans who are interested enough to go and buy things from their artists. So when you put all of those subsets crisscrossing against each other, you end up having very low addressable bases. We're very bullish on the long-term opportunities for digital collectibles. But at the moment, I think, we've been relatively bearish on how fast music NFTs in particular we're going to get to market. But anyway, I'll hand it over to these three who are resident Web3 experts and know this space much better than I do. So I'll start off in clockwise order as it appears on the screen. Over to you first, Tati, on either NFTs or Web3 and communities.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's so much we could say, and I'll try to condense it into a couple of thoughts. I think I totally agree with you that we do definitely see digital collectibles as a long-term opportunity that are going to take a lot of time to develop. And I think on that point, I wanted to add, I think many of the most interesting and revolutionary projects in this space sit so far outside the traditional music industry. Rather than building atop the incumbent frameworks, they're building something entirely different. So, for example, rather than attaching streaming royalties to a music NFT, which is taking something from the incumbent structure and adding it to the new one, they're creating, a DAO record label or something that is very, very different from everything that we've seen. And I think that those ideas do have the potential to revolutionize things, but it's going to take a long time because they are building so far outside of the traditional industry. So I think there's still a lot of excitement there, but that it'll take time to develop. And we did just kind of expect to see somewhat of a lull after the really inflated peak of NFTs over the past 2 years.
Chris?
Personally, I think artists are at their best when they use technology to connect with their fans, and people become fans of the artists because of that. But with NFTs and Web3, I think a lot of people were fans of the technology, and then artists were just filling the role of delivering that technology and the experience of engaging that technology to a lot of the people out there. And so I think right now, has the bubble burst? Well, I think the bubble is about tech and not about artistry in the same way that we traditionally think about it. And I think this year, I'm very excited about a lot of the artists that are out there, what they're doing. You look at someone like Ray, who's just gone completely independent, connecting with her fans, left her label, and just ultimately that's all that matters is you've got the artists, the music they make, the fans who want to listen to it. And then, yeah, everything that's in between, that's always going to change. And sometimes it might be NFTs, sometimes it might be something else. But at the core of this industry is the people who make music and the people who listen to it. Great.
Karol, last word for you.
Oh, well, thanks. I was going to say just very quickly, the hype cycle curve, as you said, Mark, most often works. NFTs went through the sort of peak of inflated expectations last year, and they are kind of finding their way towards the bottom of the trough of disillusionment right now. Just give it a little more time. The one thing that certainly isn't going anywhere is the fact that people spend more of their lives in the digital environment. The simple formula is the longer you spend in digital, the stronger your need to express who you are and define your image will be. NFTs can potentially be a part of that solution. They're not necessarily the only solution, but they're going to very likely be a part of it. So again, perhaps not going back to the peak of inflated expectations, but I am confident we are going to come out ultimately in the plateau of productivity in the hype cycle curve.
Brilliant. Good. Okay. So yeah, a positive enough comment to leave things on. So thank you everyone for joining. Apologies again for those who submitted questions and we didn't have time. But hope you found it interesting. And I'm just going to hand you back over to my colleague, Sion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all of our analysts for sharing your insights and expertise with us. We'll also like to thank all of the attendees for your participation and engagement during the webinar. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to learn more about our annual predictions report, please email Stephen@MIDiaResearch.com. For those of you who are registered to this webinar, you'll get a copy of the presentation and a link to rewatch via email tomorrow. If you have any issues, please feel free to contact us at events@MIDiaResearch.com. And we also have an opportunity for you to join our MIDiA community and help us shape the future of entertainment through doing surveys, joining our Discord community, and more. And there's a lot of information in the description below. And also at the end of this webinar, we'll have a short video where you can find out more about that. Thank you again for joining us, and we really hope that this session was very valuable to you. And we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. Take care and have a great day.
Hi, I'm Tatiana, and I'm an analyst at MIDiA Research, a leading entertainment research and insights company. The most influential people across the music, video, gaming, and podcast industries use the data and insights we gather from our community to drive strategy. So joining our community is the fastest, most direct way to get your voice heard and drive your industry forward. By joining our community, you'll have regular opportunities to win rewards for participating in our surveys and studies. You'll also get regular reports and data downloads to stay ahead of the curve on industry trends, and free entry to webinars and events where you can learn and network. You'll also get access to our Discord server, where you can connect with and even collaborate with like-minded creatives. Sign up today and access a free report on the blurring lines between creators and audience. We can't wait to have you as part of our community.